Welcome to Concerning the Spiritual in Art, a podcast exploring spirituality, consciousness, and the creative process. I'm your host, Martin Benson. Welcome back to the podcast, y'all. I have another mind-blowing conversation for you with visual artist Zoe McGuire. Zoe makes these incredibly metaphysical, spiritual paintings that harken to sort of like otherworldly landscapes and yet feel kind of earthbound in the same way. Her use of color is so novel and fresh. And we had a really deep conversation, not only about like her process, her experience with synesthesia and chromesthesia and how that influences her art making process, but we also talk a lot about science, quantum physics and consciousness, and how these things play into not only art making, but also play into our experience of reality and how we interpret the world. We get into understandings of like art history and their relationship to some of the work we're seeing today and sort of these threads we see coming through. And also we talk a lot about sort of her own personal like experience, with music as a ballet dancer, and how classical music really influences the way that she paints in a lot of really interesting ways. There's just a lot of varying ways this conversation moves, and we get into some really deep spaces also related to sort of our current cultural situation and how art might be an ally in our journey for reconciliation and for healing and for sort of manifesting a better world. And so we think about spirituality and art making as being really an important component to how we move through these new spaces culturally. So I think you're really going to enjoy the conversation. She has so many incredible insights to share. Her use of study and research around like her work in relation to science is really well-rounded and deep. And I just think I got a lot from this conversation. It was a really enriching one. And I think all of you out there are going to get a lot from it too. So hope you enjoy. Here's Zoe McGuire. All right, Zoe, welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so good to have you. I love being able to peer into your studio, looking at what's coming up. I'm just so attracted to your paintings. They're just magnetic. They just really have drawn me in. I remember the moment I saw them, boom, I was like a laser beam brought right into them. And I'm really curious about sort of the way that you work. And one way I wanted to kind of start off this dialogue with you is to explore kind of your influences. Like what has been like majorly influential for you, not only in your painting style and like visually, but even spiritually speaking. Like how have you come into this work for yourself?
Yeah. I mean, it's been a lifetime in the making, I'd say, but I think that the spiritual language really entered the work with more intentionality a few years ago. When I was really interrogating my relationship to music, interrogating, some transcendental art and early abstraction. Actually, when I read Kandinsky's Concerning the Spiritual Art, that's kind of what, so I'm excited to be on this show. But that really allowed me or gave me permission to start including those sorts of spiritual abstractions in the landscapes I was already making.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, that book Concerning the Spiritual Art, where the namesake for this podcast is sort of an ode to, for me, opened a lot of doors as well, because the way Kandinsky was pointing to, for example, music and its relation to visual form and the way that it can connect with our bodies and the spiritual dimensions of how like our sense doors tend to interpret our surroundings for something maybe a little bigger than what we might be sensible to, and how art can kind of point us beyond the limitations of the senses to this like sixth sense of like something else going on. So that makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of kindred spirit here, with that. And also when I look at your work, I definitely think of the transcendentalist painters from like the early 20th century. But I also look at them and I sometimes I think of Georgia O'Keeffe too, in the way that the smoothness of color and form as well. So there's a lot of relationship to art history, but they also feel so fresh and so new. And so you talk about like interrogating your relationship to music. Can you maybe like dig into that more for us? Like what was that process like for you to like think about music in relation to visual forms.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think tying back to Kandinsky, he was arguing that, music doesn't have to have this adherence to sounds in nature. So why does art have to have this adherence to sounds in nature? And I think, you know, I saw the Hilma show at the Guggenheim, and that did a
Yeah.
lot for, my kind of willingness and excitement in connecting science and art as well. And I think music is inherently this like scientific kind of
Mm.
clue about something very like innate in our minds, and this kind of interest in playing with the senses and interrogating the senses, auditory senses. But I think, yeah, it's like my relationship to music is pretty directly including color. Uh,
Mhm.
so with chromesthesia and other forms of synesthesia, like musical notes really have direct color relationships. And I think it was a process of kind of letting go and allowing those visual experiences to enter the work more freely, which was kind of a strange experience, pulling the inner reality of those color forms and shapes and putting them into the work.
Wow, it's amazing. I mean, I've had experiences with synesthesia through like deep states of meditation and psychedelics too, where like you're seeing and you're seeing sounds, you're feeling, and like I really like feeling color. It feels very like sensorial, in some ways. And it's really mind blowing. And it makes sense to me when you think about what color is, or like how we see light, for example, right? It's wavelengths, right? How we hear sounds, it's sound waves rattling our eardrum, like they're just wavelengths. And so it makes perfect sense that you could just filter the wave through a different medium to get a different sort of experience or output, but it could be the same wave. So like from that like scientific perspective, it's like, duh, yeah, like if you sort of unlock the mind and sort of the limitations in the mind a little bit about like our attachment to what sight or sound is, then there can be a crossover between the two. Did you have any like experienced synesthetic experiences like as a child that you can recall, or like is this something that has like come into your life more recently?
Yeah. And absolutely on the same page with like the wavelengths and just the kind of like overall connection and oneness of all of the senses.
Hmm.
And when I was a kid, I would always have these kind of, and they are very similar to like psychedelic experiences or hallucinogenic experiences, but you can actually see them on brain scans, et cetera. But I
Yeah.
remember just whenever I would close my eyes, there'd be like little fireworks
Mm.
relating to sound or different uh, kind of shapes and movements and patterns of light, but I didn't think anything of it
Yeah.
really.
You're like,
Uh,
everybody's like this, right?
yeah, exactly. And I also have pretty strong relationship between also like numbers and colors and letters and colors. So it's like it's kind of like, of course 6 is green. What are you talking about? Like, and it's bizarre. And I didn't really realize it was something that was abnormal or and I don't think it's actually as abnormal as people think it is. I think it can be somewhat trained, at least
Mhm.
um, chromesthesia. But
Yeah.
I was in a neuroscience class in high school, and I remember we were kind of looking at neurological disorders, and that was one of them. And I was like, wait, this is a this is a thing that not everyone
Oh
thinks.
my gosh.
Uh,
Yeah. That's amazing. I mean, because I think you're right. Like everybody, I think, has the innate ability to do this. Like I think about like really, really young children before they've been given like programs and conditioning around like what's what about the world. Like I think about like when my son was born and he was just like this pure infant. You know what I mean? Like he had no sense of language. He had no sense of like what a cup is versus a pattern on a wall necessarily. Like he couldn't really separate out these things. And like we're learning about like babies and like how they interpret basically all the data. The sensory data just comes in unfiltered, and then over time we create these sort of conditioning in the mind to say this is this and this is that, and create this sense of separation between the two. And so over time, as the child develops, they start to parse out a difference between a sound and a color, or between, a wall and a table, or so to speak. And I think which is obviously helpful, right? Like we have to be able to navigate this physical three-dimensional realm for sure. But it's also, it kind of damps down maybe that inherent ability to interpret information in a more like pure way, unfiltered sort of way. And so maybe with you, what happened is somewhere along the lines, those neural pathways never really got sealed off from each other. When you look at brain scans of people like in deep states of meditation, or in like big psychedelic openings, you see just this huge like disco ball of communication between all parts of the brain. And that's not really the case on an everyday basis. It's like we have these compartments of what's communicating with what in the mind. And so I think you're right. It can be trained or unlocked. I would say personally, having had those experiences, especially with the big psychedelic ones, I now, like when I hear music, I can see it. Like I can close my eyes and I can like concentrate and kind of calm myself and clear my mind, and I can see it in a way that I never could before. So I definitely feel these things can be unlocked, but I think it's amazing how you're tapping into them as a visual artist and thinking about music, thinking about the translation of sound wave versus light wave. Is there any music in particular that like really draws you or speaks to you, or that's really influential, like certain artists or genres of music that you've always been really kind of like gravitated toward?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also just want to say it's really cool that you get to watch these neurological developments unfold in such a intimate way. That's so exciting. And you kind of hit the nail on the head. That's actually one of the theories of why synesthesia sticks, is just that, everything is kind of this one sensory experience, or there isn't a division, and then pruning occurs. And certain elements stick for certain people and they don't really know why, but it's this involuntary experience. And certainly when I'm meditating, especially to music, sometimes it's not as vibrant or consistent, but sometimes it's just incredibly involuntary. And then I've heard of people who have been meditating for a while and then it starts to become more involuntary. So it really fascinates me, like what's going on a neurological level.
Yes.
And I'd say I did train in ballet for a really long time.
Cool.
So there's definitely this strong physical relationship to like classical ballet music, like Tchaikovsky or Minkus. Like that's mainly what I'm listening to when I'm painting, just because there's something that taps into this, or like Chopin, there's something that taps into this bodily awareness or bodily connection to the music as well. And I think that having had that music be such a strong part of my life since I was like 4 or 5 has really like, there's definitely this meditative relationship I have with it where it unlocks something a little bit deeper. I think it's also in part due to the fact that these composers were creating this music specifically for balletic movement, which has certain like mirroring on left and right. So there are certain symmetries in that music that is different somehow from other classical music.
Wow. That's amazing. I think when you listen to classical music, I remember like as a kid growing up, because I wasn't really, involved in ballet or classical music in any sense. And I always kind of like didn't get it. And I was like, this is like boring, and just my rebellious spirit. I was into like punk rock and skating and all this stuff. But as I've gotten older, like when I hear classical music, especially like, Tchaikovsky and Chopin, but Mozart too, like I'm just like blown away. Like this is super psychedelic. Like I don't think people understand. It is crazy because you're dealing with the purity of the sound waves coming through and the harmonics that are happening really do instigate a bodily experience. And then that in itself starts to initiate an emotional experience. I feel like the body is where the emotions in my experience seem to be living. And then when the body moves in a certain way or vibrates at a certain frequency, it unlocks those energies, and then they come up and bubble up into the forefront of consciousness. And then you can have these really deep emotional, even spiritual kind of transcendent experiences. So like my appreciation for that stuff is definitely grown as I've matured and realized like what's going on, especially in our music culture we have today, which is incredibly varied. I mean, there's amazing music coming out today, but there's also this formulaic thing happening where music is sort of engaging certain energies in the body and the mind that maybe aren't pointing us toward like higher consciousness, but maybe pointing us more toward like base nature consciousness. And I'm not one to judge, but like just my own experience, it's so palpable when I listen to a certain mainstream pop hit that's top number one for the past 4 weeks versus when I listen to something like I think of Ravi Shankar. I love Indian classical music, and like the qualities of sound in that too. It's like, wow, what a very different feeling that I get from it. And I think that's super special that you are able to tap into that as a painter and be able to feel those harmonics and feel like the purity and precision of those classical compositions. And do you feel like they're directly like dictating choices you're making, or is it more unconscious? Like, are you looking at the symmetry and visually as you feel it and hear it sonically? Like, is there a direct relationship, or is it just sort of painting your studio space with this kind of energy field that helps you kind of tap in intuitively more?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a combination, and it's evolving, and it's never the same on a day-to-day basis. I think there's a lot of mining that happens in the process of meditation to this music, eyes closed, like traditional meditation. And that sometimes kind of sets the stage for a flow state, which is the ultimate goal. So there might be, I might listen to a specific ballet or specific composer if I'm trying to get at like a kind of colors, kind of a color palette that relates to that music, or a rhythm that relates to that music. But a lot of times it's really just about kind of entering this creative meditation that I can sustain for a longer period of time. Because other music is definitely, I mean, my dad brought me up on classic rock, and he was very much a Deadhead, and
Me too.
ABBA,
Shout
and
out to your dad.
yeah, so I definitely have kind of a wide range of music I absolutely love. There aren't
For
many
sure.
genres where I don't love aspects of it, but I'd say that music just really helps me. And for some reason it's important that there are no lyrics, it's nonverbal. So this can extend obviously into different genres, but it really
Yeah.
just helps me kind of enter this different consciousness that allows me to just be more present with the physicality of the paint.
Wow. Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. Like I used to paint to music, and it was mostly like a lot of Indian classical music. Just like those drones and those sitars, like they just like get me in the trance state like they're supposed to,
Yeah.
but now I'm like, I don't listen to anything when I paint. I try to just there's so many paths in meditation, and I think music can be a really helpful way for people to enter meditative states. For me personally, like I definitely enjoy that, but I also love like stillness and quiet, and
Mhm.
like I like the music of the world around me too. Like I consider the sounds of the bus driving by and the bird chirping and the neighbor yelling across the street, and the rain clinking against the gutter. Like to me, that's music in some sense as well. And so I love to like tap into that. I do a lot of like listening meditation where all I'm doing is just paying attention to sound and the changing landscape and symphonies of sounds happening around me is like a
Mhm.
exercise in impermanence, of constant
Yeah.
change. And so I think these things can be incredibly influential, and varying levels and degrees. I'm curious, have you ever like gone to like any kind of like sound healing sessions or sound baths or gongs and crystal singing bowls? Have that been something a part of like your experience or interest as well? Just having already like a mind that's so ripe and open to like this sort of chromesthetic or synesthetic experience? Like, have you ever engaged in anything like that before?
I would love to. I would
Yeah.
absolutely love to go to a sound bath. And I've gone to like a lot of ballets or like concerts, and that's always leaves me feeling just so creatively rejuvenated, and also
Yeah.
leaves me being like, why do I not do this more often?
Yes.
Um, I actually received from my partner a steel drum for my birthday, and also a flute for Christmas, and he's a musician, so it's sometimes, especially with the steel drum and the vibrations that come from that. I'm by no means a musician, but there's something about feeling
Hmm.
physical sound from an instrument in person that is just so
Yes.
wildly different, and I think it does something similar to what you're discussing, which I can totally see in your work, just kind of dissolving that threshold between interior and exterior
Hmm.
reality and experience, and kind of letting sound of any nature kind of flood in without judging them, and just being curious about the physicality of that sound. It's definitely a very different experience when you realize the tactility of it.
Yes, definitely. The vibration, yeah, that you feel from those instruments. Like I always like think about just like your work. Like sadly, I've never gotten to see your work in person. I know I will at some point because but you can never fully understand a painting and what a painter is doing until you like are presented with the energy of its presence, these artifacts of your process, you know. And I feel the same way for musicians. It's like,
Yeah.
like there's so much music out there. My friends send me all sorts of stuff. I listen to it all the time and I love it, but like I can never fully connect or understand a musician until I'm hit by those sound waves in the moment that they're sending them out from their instruments and their amps. You know what I mean? Like when I'm in that physical space, there is this a notion of like, ah, yes, like this band knows what's up. Like they're working
Yeah.
together. Like there is a different experience because so many things can happen in post production where you can make anything sound good, but like to hear its raw vibration from the source itself in real time. I mean, there's nothing to, replace that. So I definitely, all of that to say, like, I definitely recommend you going to a sound bath or a gong bath sound healing session, because that's the same thing. Like they literally like inject like those vibrations into every cell in your body, and it is incredibly healing,
Yeah.
incredibly cathartic, and just a beautiful experience, especially when you share that space with others too.
Yeah.
I'm sure wherever you live, anyone out there, I recommend for anybody, even if you're just like, oh, this woo woo, this is not, oh, I don't know about this. Just stretch your boundaries, and go experience it. Cause it is really like an amazing way to initiate you into a new form of connection to your body and your emotions and your mind itself. I have a Tibetan singing bowl that I use
Yeah.
daily, and those are really because like you're holding them and you're feeling the vibration entering your body as you're playing them. And man, talk about like creating resonance, with every cell in your body. You're like harmonizing yourself in the moment. So like sound and music have been really influential for me too, more of like as a healing practice as well,
Mhm.
which is really just really powerful. Like, have you ever seen the didgeridoos, like with the Aboriginal instruments? Did you ever
Yeah.
talk about that?
Yeah.
Oh
Absolutely.
my God. I remember one
So
time
cool.
this dude, I was at this like sound healing and he had a didgeridoo and he was just going around and just like pumping vibrations like into your chakras. Like, and you're just like, holy shit, what is going on? Your body is just like vibrating in
Yeah.
such a way that you feel like you're about to leave your body. It's pretty wild, pretty trippy stuff.
It is, and it's cool that it's becoming more accepted or more mainstream to attend these events, and
Yes,
have these spiritual practices be part of your life, and it's not quite as woo-woo as it might have been even 5, 10 years ago. But are
exactly.
you a musician? Do you play any instruments?
I don't, sadly. I mean, I played piano as a kid for a few years, and My poor piano teacher. She really, like, I would go to her house and she was a sweet older lady, but it smelled so bad. And I was a little kid. I was like, Mom, I can't go over there anymore. I can't do it. And I somehow gave up on it. But I do like to sing. Like, I
Oh, cool.
definitely love singing, and we're a very musical family. We listen to music all the time. I live in New Orleans, so like
Yeah.
music is everywhere. We have second lines, that happen, where basically people are playing music and parading through the street randomly all the time. We get them outside our house, and the second like we hear music in the distance, we're like, second line. We all run outside and just neighbors dancing in the street. It's mostly brass music.
That's so fun.
But it's a big part of my life. I just, it's one thing I wish I would have stuck to, and I probably could. It's never too late to pick something up.
Yeah.
But I think about my son, like, and I have a daughter on the way too, and like I
Wow,
want them to play music. Like, I hope they'll love it. I want them to find whatever instrument they love, because I think that skill is really amazing for the brain development.
yeah.
Talk about creating like incredible connections in the neural pathways of the mind, through music. Do you play any instruments?
I make a lot of sounds on instruments. I don't know.
Well, you say you have the
I don't,
steel drum and the flute, so
yeah, exactly. I love playing guitar, and my partner, he's a really amazing guitar player. So
wow.
I
He just
love,
serenades you, just
yeah, exactly.
that's amazing.
So there are a lot of guitars around in our apartment, and a lot of instruments, and kind of a piano, drum,
Yeah.
numerous guitars. I now have a flute, which I'm like, I don't know how to play this, but I love it.
Yeah, but you're so young, you could still pick it up anytime. It's just, we only have so much time in the day. I get that, like what we're gonna
Yeah.
like dedicate our time to. And I know your paintings, I mean, they're, heavily involved in terms of scale and material and some of the complexity in your compositions. I love them so much. They feel like otherworldly, but yet still grounded in some thread of like this world as well. Like, you do a really good job of painting the sense of like transcendental space, but yet keeping a thread of groundedness in them. Whether it's through like some of the landscape elements that you're bringing into them, or even like the sense of like the light in the skies that are happening. They're like cosmic kind of like suns or stars, or like little comets flying through. Like, I'm not even sure like what it is, but there is this thread. But I think your color, I'm so fascinated with like your color choices, because the way you use color is so like fresh and unexpected. You know what I mean? And it's really hard. Color is really tricky to work with, because you could easily just throw everything in there, the whole spectrum, and play around with that. But it's much more difficult to find new combinations of relationship within color. Where do you find your influence from color? I know for sure it's got to be your musical synesthetic experiences as well. But do you find them in other places? Like, are you always kind of like observing your environment, taking notes about interesting color relationships, or in nature? Like, what are some other ways you think about like color in your painting?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm always mining my visual experience for new color combinations, and I spend a lot of time with like science textbooks and color textbooks looking at, the color combinations in nature that are just so bizarre and exciting. And
Yeah.
there isn't a one-to-one kind of relationship necessarily, but the aim is to kind of absorb that so it can intuitively come out in the paintings as I'm making them.
Yeah.
The one exception to that being, I made a show this past summer where I was looking specifically at pollinators and the plants that they're pollinating. So I was thinking a lot about how color can actually lead to reproduction, or lead to this merging of species, these symbiotic or mutualistic relationships. And color is literally used, or complementary colors are used to actually physically draw species together. And I just
Yeah.
think it's so fascinating that there's this biological and existential imperative for color and beauty to exist. And I just think
Yes.
that's so astounding. And then
Hmm.
to see also the way that light behaves in outer space, or to see the James Webb Space Telescopes, and just see how vibrant and artistic and just so rich with these fascinating color combinations. And that's always been a pretty huge influence to me. I also mine a lot, I think, from different movements in art history. Having studied art history in undergrad, that was always, I was kind of trying to think, as I'm going through a museum or looking through a book, like which paintings I'm attracted to and why. And it almost always has to do with specific color combinations.
Yeah.
So it's coming from a lot of different sources.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I love what you're saying about like this biological or existential imperative to survive, like how color is an incredibly important part of that. I mean, think about the pollinators. Like if we didn't have any of them, oof, we'd be in big trouble very fast. And so like I love like when looking at colors, not only in relationship of like just the diversity of like flowering plants around the world, like just the insane infinite combinations of pattern and color that you find in those sort of flora, but also in birds, like the various colors you find on birds, like the birds of paradise, especially down in the rainforest. It's like there's something going on here where it's not random, like there is such harmony and purposefulness to everything that's happening around us. And I look at like what's happening in art, especially with what's happening with artists like yourself. I consider myself in this same vein too. And a lot of the artists that I'm speaking to is like, there is this resurgence of like allowing the spiritual revelry and sort of what's the word I'm looking for, like this sort of ode or like acknowledgement of the spiritual dimensions of life are coming back into the forefront of the consciousness of a lot of makers and artists and creatives. It's always been there, but like when you think about the sort of ebb and flow of art history, especially in the 20th century, it really kind of got snuffed out a little bit and kind of pushed to the outsider art, the visionary art, kind of outside the echelons of power structures within art itself. And so I'm really excited. You mentioned the Hilma show at the Guggenheim. And, I've talked a number of artists I've been interviewing bring this up. Like we look at it as like almost like a perfect point of intersection between sort of the shift from the old guard into this new space, and I think part of our role is to bring people back into awareness of it, because I think our culture is very numbing, and it is kind of has this nihilistic bend to it where like their purposefulness and meaninglessness is more easily I don't know, you're more easily able to align with that for the sake of your own material consumption and desires. And I think we need to counteract that more than ever, because it's like I look at these paintings that are happening and these artists that are working, and when I see them, it's pointing to that something beyond what is known or what can be sort of I don't know, put into a little box that we can buy and sell and trade. It's pointing to an experience that extends beyond even this just one life, that we're connected in a web of infinite life for all time. And it's not random. There's a very distinct purposefulness and harmony to the design of the universe. I look at sacred geometry and sort of even thinking about quantum physics, and sort of this like the string theory and how everything is related to everything else in this infinite cosmic web. And I think we need people to be aware of that more than ever, because it's going to change the way we move in the world. When we move in the world, knowing and acknowledging our sheer interdependence. Do you see that as well, like in your life from your perspective? Because you're really, coming into the art scene in an incredible way. Like you're just exploding in there and being accepted right off the bat, which is just like, to me, it's like, oh, this is a sign, that like there's an opening here now. And so, you moving into this space, like, are you seeing what I'm sort of pointing to about this sort of shift happening?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the Hilma show really kind of showed people that there was this intellectual merit to quote unquote spiritual art. And I think it's experiential. I think that it has a lot to do with conveying a sense of awe and this transmission of experiences of awe. I think one of the dangers of, this intensely capitalistic time in the art market, which, in some ways is a good thing. More artists are able to make money off their work, and there's this creative kind of boom happening. But at the same time, I think a lot of people consider like spiritual art purely kind of an aesthetic that is being formulated to take part in that genre, rather than it being this experience that the artist is having and then conveying and extracting from an inner world. And, I'm sure there are artists who are kind of borrowing from different visual elements or geometric elements, and maybe that's a way for them to enter that space. So it's neither good nor bad, but I think that there's a really interesting opportunity for art to regain that sense of awe. And there are lots of paintings that, or works of art that do that without kind of fitting into this category. And
Definitely.
I think it's kind of one of the most important emotions. And it's cool to see how scientists are tapping into kind of concepts of awe or spirituality and confirming what has been, you can look back thousands of years and see that this knowledge is kind of been a part of our neurological makeup for so long. And it's cool to see it's starting to be confirmed in science. But yeah, I definitely see this really beautiful expansion and this acceptance of this type of work and an enjoyment of this type of work since that show, honestly. And I think it's kind of just opened up the realm of possibilities for a lot of artists. I look at Loie Hollowell too, who has always been a big influence. And I remember seeing her work and just being pulled and magnetized toward it, and thinking like, what is that? What is going on optically? What is happening in my brain? What are these colors doing? Or this treatment of paint that's like pulling me in to spend more time with the work? Because I think that's another, our attention spans obviously have drastically changed. And I think it's, I'm very curious about how people act in museums and how long they spend with certain works and why. And I think that's kind of like a fascinating element of our times, this problem of like, how do you get people to stay with something
Yes.
for more than a few minutes?
It's so crucial that we find a way to like counterbalance that, like the instant gratification, the constant updates on our feeds, the scrolling, everything is sort of like limiting our neurological capacity for focus and concentration and absorption. And awe, I think, comes from absorption, and absorption comes from stillness and spaciousness and quietness in the mind, to be able to feel and connect and resonate with what's in front of you. And I think what might be happening with a lot of the work that you're referencing, like Loe's work, which is, yeah, I felt the same way. I came across it few years ago and I was the same way. I was like, yes, this is like, wow, this is just incredibly magnetic, but also like, I think it's the sense of light and space and luminosity. It's like pointing to like a pure realm beyond like the sort of forms that we're used to, but forms that still feel familiar in some sense, like almost like hearkening to like a space that might have been or always is underneath the surface of what we experience.
Yeah.
I think about consciousness a lot and sort of how it crystallizes around material experiences for the sake of many reasons, for the sake of adaptation, survivability, and so forth. But I think consciousness is so much more than, I think it, in my experience, and I think a lot of scientists are debating it, I don't think consciousness exists solely in the brain, like in terms of the brain as being like what generates the consciousness itself. I look at consciousness as being everything that is, and the brain is receiving it. It's like a radio antenna that is receiving those waves and those vibrations for various reasons, and giving us the experience of life in some way. So it is kind of like a matrix in some way. And a lot of ancient cultures have been talking about that forever. Like in the Vedic culture, we hear a lot of speak about the Leela, the dance, or Maya, the illusion, this cosmic dance happening within the grand illusion of form. I think about Shunyata in Buddhism, emptiness, and the
Yeah.
concept of what emptiness is. And I think emptiness is sort of a way of describing dark matter, which is a way of describing infinite
Yeah.
quantum potential, unmanifested potential that exists, like the observer effect in quantum physics. When I'm not looking back here, this is existing in some pure state. When I turn around, it crystallizes into what I'm expecting it to be.
Yeah.
And so I think, all this to say, like, I think what's happening in the paintings that you're speaking of is it's pointing to maybe that space of infinite possibility that is just pure light, you know, and pure, vibration or pure consciousness. Like, it's such a mystery to me, but like, I think all the clues are there, and science is catching up and saying things that, many cultures have been saying, like you said, for thousands and thousands of years. And so I think it's like almost like the circle, it's like the Ouroboros, like the snake is about to come back and eat its tail. You know
Exactly.
what I mean? And so all this happening at this time in 2023, it's like, oh, it's a perfect timing for the reemergence of this kind of work. Because I think we're hungry for it. It seems, we're starving for spiritual connection. We're more lonely than we've ever been as a whole, more isolated than we've ever been as a whole. Paradoxically, at the same time, we're more connected than we've ever been. So, like, how do we bridge this gap between these two competing realities? And I think art has always been a way to bridge gaps, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's always been a way, it's always been about a way of communicating and creating a sense of connection between one and another,
Yeah.
which reveals our inherent unity. And so that's my like hope, is that like this kind of work that you're engaging in, that many artists are starting to be accepted and exposed to wider audiences are engaging in, is going to help create some kind of like, I don't know, some kind of tipping point in
Yeah.
collective consciousness. But maybe that's just my idealist mindset.
No, I love it. I mean, so much of what you said is so on point, and I can see it in your work too, and how it unfolds. And I think those mysteries are, like the mysteries of like what's going on exactly with quantum mechanics and general relativity, and why does quantum mechanics work, or the standard model can be applied when we don't really like get it. I think that's crazy. And
I
then
know. It's like, what are we playing with?
But it's all so fascinating, and just something I'm really interested in is the way that shapes will reverberate from, the microscopic to the macroscopic, and that's coming into the work a lot. And I think it's pointing to what you're saying about light and forms, and this combination of like external reality or familiar forms with these geometric abstractions. But yeah, it's kind of a fascinating thing that artists are able to sort of predict science in certain ways through this like haptic or intuitive knowledge. Like I'm thinking
Mhm.
about how like Dante kind of predicted the three sphere model, and then Einstein, like, centuries later, kind of
Yes.
also like brought that forward. And I think there are so many fascinating examples of that, like even Van Gogh, like kind of predicting the way that cosmic radiation operates on a visual sense. So it just makes me think that there are these shapes and these forms and these modes of observation that kind of extract this inner knowledge, which speaks to your point about this kind of pan consciousness that scientists are trying to comprehend.
Mhm.
Science of tree communication, which I've been
Right.
really, really obsessed with lately. I think that's just, we're just kind of tapping into this fascinating understanding of how like plant life, for example, has far more conscious properties than we
Exactly.
expected or understood. So I think it's a really exciting time for understanding consciousness, and it's
Mhm.
definitely the zeitgeist artistically.
It is. It is. And because I think that's where like the biggest unlocking point is for like the mysteries around us, is just the idea of what is consciousness itself, and how does consciousness exist inside of me versus inside of you. Is there a real difference between the consciousness that you're experiencing and what I'm experiencing, outside of course, like the surface level differences, but like in its pure form and its pure state. And I think that's what sometimes happens in these deep states of absorption of, when we say like awe or absorption, I think of like in meditative language, samadhi, like
Yeah.
pure unity consciousness. Like you tap back into the source of your own consciousness, and that has a cascading effect on your DNA and the way you operate forever. Like you never ever will be the same after that. And we're also so coupled with this like scientific unfolding of like our, the mysteries of consciousness and quantum physics. We have this emerging, paradigm of psychedelic research in relation to depression and PTSD and end of life anxiety, and sort of like the healing properties of these compounds. And really the healing is not happening in a biological sense like other medicine does. It's what it is. It's giving you a experience of your consciousness that's causing the healing to happen from this
Yeah.
experience of your consciousness. It's not like I'm taking an Advil to reduce inflammation for the sake of pain. It's a totally different modality of healing, where it's really just getting your consciousness to vibrate at a certain frequency, which ushers in various types of experiences, which, when done thoughtfully and in a safe way, in a very controlled manner, can facilitate healing on levels we've never seen before.
Yeah.
And so these technologies I look at like these compounds as a form of technology in some ways that cultures have been using forever. Like they've been using psychedelic, psychotropic, like medicines, or, ritualistic, sacraments for as long as we can really recount. So it's a big part of our humanity in some ways to be able to connect with our bigger levels of consciousness. And so now it's coming to the mainstream. And so I see all these things converging at such a perfect time, when like we are having the most incredible shit show laid out before us on the planet. It's like it's all coming together in a beautiful way. And I don't know. I'm excited to see how this all continues to unfold,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think to your point about consciousness being this kind of shared thing, I think again about synesthesia and how someone who has been really influential in my life is the artist Carol Steen, who actually went to the Cranbrook Academy of Art. And I was a few years back, I was trying to understand my synesthetic experience. And I was just like Googling like artists with synesthesia to see if they were seeing similar things. And she was making, I found her work, and she's making these works directly related to her synesthetic and chromesthetic experience. So I like sent her an email, and for some reason she responded, and we met up for coffee. And it was kind of the first time I felt like less crazy about the whole thing. And she was kind of explaining, she's part of the national like board of synesthetes or something along those lines. And so basically she's kind of also a scholar in the field, and she kind of showed me, okay, these are like, here's a chart of the different shapes and forms and color relationships a lot of synesthetes visually experience. And you see it also with psychedelics, and you see it in, again, deep states of meditation. And she kind of introduced me to the ancient literature about synesthesia, the way that it's played into the works of artists like Kandinsky and Miro, and so many other examples. But it's just the fact that we see these same shapes and forms that clues me into, the potential of light being just this manifestation of consciousness and our relationship to the sun, as this kind of like central element of consciousness. And so once you kind of like see light and water too, which I think about a lot, but once you kind of see those as these like elemental life-bearing forces, and life force and consciousness as this kind of inextricable force, you start, all of these delineations kind of disintegrate.
Yep.
And so it's trippy. And
Yeah.
and then I think too, of back to you were discussing how you kind of use sound as meditation, the sounds around you. I think that one of my favorite meditations is this like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method, where you're doing a walking meditation and you pick 5 things you can see, focus on each, with specific breath work, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can feel, 2 things you can smell, 1 you can taste. And there's something when you do it with kind of attentiveness and you practice that skill, there's something that clicks at the end of that meditation if you're holding on to all those experiences. And then you experience what you were discussing, that like feeling of emptiness and clarity. And it's a fascinating state that I'm always trying to get back to. And it's hard to hold on to.
It is, because the mind is so fickle, and the monkey mind, like because we're so filled with judgments, we're so filled with modes of interpretation and concepts that we have to wrap around our experiences for the sake of understanding them. And there's also this fear also that comes through with the ego, because I think the ego mechanism in the brain, which has been identified by neuroscientists as being like the default mode network, is kind of how they're framing it. And they see under states of psychedelics or deep meditations, the default network just goes off. So people talk a lot about ego death, and I think ego is sort of the harbinger of control. And it's always looking for ways to control. And it's when we can sort of counteract that mechanism of the mind, this habit that we've formed throughout our life, which is a good habit in a lot of sense too. We need an ego in order to survive, as one spiritual teacher put it, you need just enough ego not to walk in front of a bus. Just enough not to walk in front of the bus into traffic. But like when we can turn that part of the mind off, let go of fear, let go of control, and let go of identification with concepts and forms, and we can just purely let the raw data of our moment to moment experience be absorbed within us, then we're starting to tap into a sense of unity consciousness. So like this practice you're talking about, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, is exactly that. It's a way of sort of like relinquishing boundaries between these things, tapping into presence, and being fully absorbed in the totality of data coming through the sense doors, and so I think when we can start to, it's really hard to do because our minds are so loud, and the ego wants to control, doesn't really want you to go to those places because there's a lot of fear around letting go. I think that's what a lot of people turns people away from meditation or psychedelics, is because a lot of times you hear they have a fear of losing control. They don't want to lose their mind and lose control. I'm like, I get it. I know that for sure. I get it. But sometimes I think that's the best thing you can do, is surrender and let go of control. And then that's where the cascading events of unity consciousness start to percolate and then explode through every cell in your body. And you can never be the same after that. Like you're not always in that state. No one could live in that state purely moment to moment all day, every day. But even just touching it and tasting it and experiencing it fully for even a millisecond, like a microsecond, it shows you your potential for compassion and for love, because you realized on a cellular level your inseparability from every single thing that surrounds you. And then your life starts to change because you make decisions based on that notion that you're not separate from your neighbor, you're not separate from your dog, you're not separate from that cockroach, even though some people don't like them. You're not, you're not separate from any of it. You're a part of this beautiful fabric of life. And the beauty of the human consciousness is that we can be stewards of beauty in this world. Like the vision I like to hold all the time, especially at the end of my meditation sessions, is the vision of like all of humanity stepping into their ultimate role as like the stewards of this planet, protectors of this planet, protectors of the beauty, inherent harmony, and unity of all of life, because right now we've set ourselves separate from it, and it's created the world we see right now.
Yeah, beautifully said. And I think, so many things that you touched on. And I think I grew up around a lot of Buddhist texts because my mom was always really invested in Thich Nhat Hanh and Pema Chodron and all
Hmm.
of these wonderful thinkers. And I used to be like, Mom, what are you doing? That's so weird. But then, when I started actually really dipping into it, especially Pema's work in the
Hmm.
book Start Where You Are,
Yeah.
um, it just unlocked so much and released all of these negativity biases that never really go away, because as you said, it's part of our ability as a species to detect threats. But so many of our like threat perceptions are dated. Like we're no longer
In the bush,
yeah, we're no longer like hiding from that lion. We can chill out to a certain degree, but we still
Yeah.
maintain these highly sensitive uh, threat perception skills in our mind. And it's kind of fascinating when you start to untangle that and realize, like you said, that our default state of being is actually this really open, relaxed state. And I in one of your other podcast episodes, I think you said something along the lines of the mind serves the heart. And I thought that was such a beautiful truth, that we're locked up in our minds all day, but there is this kind of beautiful uh, state of being that is much more connected, I think, to this kind of ancient truth of our species that's shared. And
Hmm.
it takes a lot of the pressure off of being a
Yeah.
human on a day-to-day basis, when
Yeah.
you kind of realize that the nature of everything is neither good nor bad, and it doesn't require judgment.
Hmm.
That was kind of like a mind-blowing realization,
It
and meditation
is.
really helps you kind of remember that on a daily basis, even though it's
Yes. That's so funny you say remember. I mean, that is really what the root of mindfulness means, is to remember.
yeah.
It is like we need to remember what we've forgotten as a species because of the world we've built around us, which is
Mhm.
highly distractible. And it has its virtues too. And I think when you couple our technological and scientific breakthrough and understanding with the heart consciousness and unity consciousness, God, what could we make from that? Like what could we actually manifest on this planet? How could we actually create a world of equity? How could we actually create a world of shared sense of care for each other? This is the vision I hold in my heart every day, and I think the way to manifest that vision is to try to embody it as best as you can, with obviously showing the same sort of compassion, non-judgmental, loving mind toward yourself,
Yeah.
because that's where we judge the most. Essentially we judge ourselves against the world so much. But we're all in it together. It's not like this, this dog eat dog world, anymore. You know what I mean? Like, the reason humanity has made it this far is because of shared cooperation,
Mhm.
community, a sense of selflessness within the community. So I had a conversation with someone the other day, actually, and they were trying to talk to me about why selfishness is important and good and why it's here. And I understand what they're getting at. They were kind of pointing it in sort of the lens of evolutionary biological principles of survival. Like, if we didn't, fight off this person or that person to survive, we wouldn't be here. But I think the ultimate form of selfishness is what the Dalai Lama preaches a lot, which is the awareness that, the highest form of selfishness comes from the awareness that you are the other. And
Yeah.
so it ultimately serves you to help the other, because that is you. So that's the ultimate form of selfishness, is first to realize the self is not you, it's the other and you together. And so, like, I see that the only reason we've made it this long is, like I said, shared cooperation, community, collaboration, communication, and all of that. And so we can't forget that in these very volatile, divisive times where everything around us wants to pull us apart,
Yeah.
wants us to be this or that and pick sides. I say, excuse my French, fuck that. I don't choose. The only side I choose is the side of shared love and compassion and unity consciousness. But obviously, that has to look, it's not going to look clean all the time. But I don't know. I don't know. I'm ranting now, but
No, I love it.
I can do that sometimes. I just can just like regurgitate and stuff. So just tell me to
It's
stop. But
great.
like, I just get in these modes where like I just feel inspired to share these things, you know?
Yeah. No, it's important to kind of also spread that knowledge, because I do think that a lot of people are tapping into this, which is really exciting. And it's now how can it be applied?
Hmm.
Some of the biggest problems we're facing. And I think about, the ways in which uh the kind of devastation internally and the anxiety that I feel about climate change, for example, or the rapid deterioration of our world. I try to really understand how that's coming into the work. And I think a lot about the concept of the sublime and the Hudson River School, especially as it pertains to, the region I grew up in, upstate
Yeah.
New York, and thinking of like Thomas Cole, for example, as one of the first like environmentalists and
Yes.
his texts, and this underlying concept of the sublime, which I think we kind of forget that, it's not just about this beauty. It's not about, the light, the kind of softness and magnificence of beauty. There's also implicit like terror in that. And I think that the kind of indifference of nature is really like similarly, it's the same thing as this kind of feeling of um that baseline or that default kind of emptiness. It includes these, the terrifying aspects of nature, the fact
Hmm.
that, life on Earth kind of came out of, one cell eating another or whatever it was essentially. And so there's this predator prey aspect of nature too, and this indifference. And I think the way that, the Earth is retaliating a bit, it's just unlocking all of these emotions and trying to convey that through color or through scale, is something I'm really interested in doing, and trying to
Yeah.
find a way to connect that to a larger consciousness, like an expression of this anxiety without necessarily being, you know, doomsday about it. And
Yeah.
kind of this really difficult problem of like, how do we solve, this massive mess that we've gotten ourselves into, with a sense of compassion and with a sense of mindfulness and attentiveness. And I really do think it what the Dalai Lama or Thich Nhat Hanh have said, it's if everyone kind of tapped into these spiritual practices or tapped into these mindfulness and meditation, um, some of these things just like wouldn't be happening, which is something I've struggled to wrap my head around, but I see where they're coming from.
Yeah, yeah, because it's hard to imagine it at scale, you
Yeah.
know? Like you can experience it for yourself, but to imagine it at scale is tricky, you know? I like to think that like all the solutions to all the problems that we are faced with right now exist currently on the planet. They
Yeah.
all exist right now. It's just a matter of who's getting what voice is being heard or allowed to be heard, and
Mhm.
what technologies are allowed to come to fruition, and what sort of like legislation is allowed to be applied, you know, like it's so it's tricky because like the solutions are there, but I think before we can get to like letting all those solutions come out, you know, of the woodwork to be of service to our vision for this world, we have to find a way to get right with each other.
Yeah.
I think about practices of reconciliation and the ability for people. I forget the name of the woman who was kind of a real pioneer in this space, where she developed these practices. We're bringing like really like violent competing factions in various like tribal cultures in like the Middle East and other parts of Africa too, like that have committed just insane atrocities against each other, and getting the like representatives in the same room, people that
Mm.
hate each other to their core, and finding a way of facilitating a form of reconciliation and forgiveness and letting go. And the amount of success that was done under those circumstances, like wow, like very inspiring. I have to look it up. If I find it, I'll put it in the show notes who this
Yeah.
person is, because I think that's what we need too, is a way of creating reconciliation with those we don't agree with, and building bridges of communication, because the more that we fight against each other, the worse it's going to get.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to take time, and it's, you know, we have to have some patience, but we also have to have some fortitude, you know, at the same time. And we also have to hold that line of truth, and hold that compassionate vision by living it. I think on some quantum level, on some weird consciousness level, like by you holding it, you know, and by me holding it, it's going to stay and it's going to find its way through. And I think that's what we're seeing when we talked about this convergence of like physics and science and consciousness and meditation, like all these things coming into the like the cultural zeitgeist in this sort of moment in time. Like it's not an accident, you know. I think
Yeah.
everything it seems to unfold in a perfect way, but you tend to only see that like retrospectively. I've definitely seen that play out in my life in some deep suffering that I've been through and deep hardships and difficulties. Like I look back at those times and they were the best thing that ever happened to me. Like it, hands down, it was the most important thing that happened to me. Now in the moment, I was the victim. I was as depressed as it comes, you know. I was just had no compass, no way of no ground, but by some form of grace found my way through. And look back at it, it's like I needed that. Like I needed that medicine of sadness, of terror, of anxiety, of fear, of loneliness, of you know, lack of connection, because it ultimately led me to a higher form of connection, you know. But it's hard to see that when you're in the midst of it. And so I look at what's happening on the greater world as like a metaphor for the same experience that I experienced too, or analogy to like what I experienced in some sense. Like we're having the dark night of the soul, so to speak. But ultimately we need it.
How'd you get out of that space? Was it meditation that helped you through?
Yeah, a combination of that. You know, love of family and friends, support, you know, was a big part. But yeah, definitely meditation and spiritual healing definitely got me out of it. I remember I was really ill. I don't want to get in deep to it, but I was like in a very, very sick, had a, you know, kind of a near death experience, and came out of that. And I was in a very vulnerable space. And one of my dear friends, Lonnie, shout out Lonnie, love you, Lonnie, invited me to like a meditation potluck. I was in school in California. I had to move home for the year, to leave school for a year, and I came back to finish. And like the first couple nights I got back, she invited me to this potluck group meditation. I was like, meditation, cool. I always like envisioned like kung fu masters and stuff like that, and martial artists and stuff. I didn't know a concept really. And I remember sitting in this group of lovely, amazing, warm people and sitting, and someone led a meditation, and I had a really big experience, and it just opened a door inside of me. And I knew that this was something I had to pursue. I immediately signed up for a course to learn. And
Mm.
then I've been on that journey for almost 15 years now, you know, practicing daily. But that's my path, you know, of healing. But I think there are many paths to heal, but that for me definitely helped me. And it opened my mind to all these ideas we're talking about today. Like it
Yeah.
opened honestly, the mind of curiosity again, to not look at the world so like in such a mundane way, but to be like a child again, like so
Yeah.
fascinated and so curious by all the things I don't freaking understand, but like in a beautiful way, you know? So yeah, that's sort of, you know, how I look at it. Like, I think we're in this dark, that was my dark night of the soul, but I think we're in a collective one right now. But I think the wisdom that is here on the planet and the love that I see all around me all the time, the energy and beauty that I see in work like what you're making, you know,
Mm.
all of these things are playing their part in helping lead us out of this dark space. But
Yeah.
it's going to take all of us for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fascinating how you know, one's experience, which thank you for sharing and
Yeah.
sharing how you kind of healed from that. But it's fascinating that it's a microcosm for these larger experiences, which just speaks again to the inextricability of humanity. And I think that curiosity is the perfect antidote to fear, uh,
Yes. Oh, wow.
to
Yes.
isolation and loneliness. And I think that's where kind of an interrogation of science has been really helpful. And for me, just in terms of getting out of my own head. Uh, and also, I think that there's this something I struggle with, relating back to noise and sound, that I think a lot of people struggle with now, is just being okay with emptiness, being okay with the thoughts in your own head and not going crazy when you don't have media of some sort in your headphones or playing out loud or some, yeah, exactly. And it's really an addiction that we're all trying to collectively kind of balance. And it's strange because there are certain elements of Instagram, for example, that I really love. I really love that I've been introduced to some of my favorite artists of all time and connected with some wonderful people like yourself.
Yeah,
But then
100%.
there's also this kind of anxiety of what am I not doing right now? What am I not learning about? Because I'm kind of tethered into this space. And I think that, science has been a really, really useful exploration and a huge part of my practice in terms of like certain writers who have really inspired me, like Carlo Rovelli or Stephen Hawking, and kind of dipping into that has also been a meditative practice. Like it's kind of sad and fascinating that even just like reading a book for an extended period of time is like harder now.
Yes. Oh my God. I love what you said, how curiosity is like an antidote to fear. I mean, bing, 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 because like that is what gets us out of our own head and gets us into awe and wonder and
Yeah.
a sense of humility too, right? Like when you have curiosity, it's like you have to come from a place of humbleness and humility to like, wow, I don't know something. This is awesome, instead of like this sort of like judgmental, like, oh, I don't know something. I suck. I'm terrible. I'm stupid. I'm this, I'm that. So we have to shift the way that we think about not knowing. Like I love you mentioned Thich Nhat Hanh, and in the Zen Buddhist tradition, the beginner's mind.
Mhm.
The beginner's mind is there are no experts. And that's a mindset. My thesis actually was called Beginner's Mind. It
Oh,
was all
cool.
exploration in that, of like learning how to let go and distill back to like ground zero kind of thing. But yeah,
Yeah.
studying is so important, like as an artist, like, yeah, I spend a lot of time making art and thinking about the art that I want to make and all this stuff. But I do spend probably as much, not more time reading and studying and being fascinated by like articles online. But I'm always reading books, like, and always trying to expand my awareness of all the corners of the universe that I still haven't known. I love the phrase, you don't know what you don't know. You know what I mean? It's like, and to me, that feeling of uncovering something new is a form of a renewed sense of living in life. It's invigorating, it's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're really, in some ways, we're very fortunate that we live at a time where there's still so much mystery
Yeah.
and so much that is unsolved. I think it'd be kind of boring to live in a world where we have it all figured out. Uh, like I think even um, this search for, you know, this again, this emergence of quantum mechanics and general relativity, like we're searching for the kind of key to the universe, so to speak.
Hmm.
And I kind of love the concept of, what if we never get there?
Yeah.
That's like maybe there are just some mysteries that we're not meant to solve because in a way it keeps us going in an evolutionary sense. And so, I mean, I think even of like soil, for example, like we know nothing about soil. And it's crazy when you start to realize all of these things we think we have such rich knowledge on, or we have all of these answers to. There are a lot of gaps, and we've come so far as a species, but I think there's this illusion that happens with like Google, for example, where we think, we don't necessarily seek out information because we think we have it all so close to us and we have the ability to look up anything. But then there's obviously so much that's incorrect, but there's also just so many things
Yeah.
that we don't know. And that's like, it's really fascinating. And I think that quality of mystery is something I see in your work that I hope to convey in my work, where there's this element of like not really fully knowing like where this landscape takes place, or if that's a tree or a waterfall, and kind of the way that things forms will morph into one another. And
Hmm.
I think it's that element of mystery that like keeps me painting and keeps
Yes.
this kind of like rich experience for me of like, I don't know what's going to happen if these colors are next to one another or if they merge.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think
Yeah, mystery is everything. I mean, that's what makes life also exciting too. Like it's a never-ending evolutionary cycle of expansion, and I think on maybe one, like I think of like levels of knowing in relation to like our mortal life, like this embodied existence as Martin, as Zoe, but I come from a school and experience of thought that, I think there's more than even just this life that we don't know about, we'll ultimately all find out, everyone who's come before us has moved through that doorway. But as Alan Watts says, like, how could there be a form of death if there wasn't a form of birth? And how could there be birth if there was no death before? So like on, off, on, off, on, off, like by virtue of being born means that where did that come from? Death had to happen at some point, and then birth. So there's an endless cycle of this stuff, but it is a mystery. And I think surrendering to the mystery is a huge component of being an artist, of letting go of the need for answers. And I feel like that's something in my own work as I evolve and grow, I want to get better at, of letting go of control, of letting go of knowing where I'm headed. You know what I mean? And becoming more and more spontaneous. But it's hard to do that. I think in time that comes through. But yeah, we live in this mystery together, Zoe, and we're sharing in this space, and it's a beautiful thing. And at the very least, the ability to connect, like how we're connecting right now, and share ideas and find this like common ground of inquiry and curiosity. And this is what it's all about, So I'm grateful that you're able to join me today and that you're willing to be on the show with me and dive deep like this. I mean, we could keep going. We've been going for like an hour and like 15 minutes. I don't want to take up your whole day, but I feel like we could just keep talking about these ideas. There's so much more to excavate here. So maybe sometime down the road we can circle back and continue this dialogue, but it's been really illuminating for me, and I'm really just excited and so supportive of what you're doing and where you're going. And I just want to say push, 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 and open, 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 and keep being you and exploring and letting that curiosity guide you, because it's taking you to some beautiful places, which hence are taking all of us to some really beautiful places. So I want to extend a thank you for what you're doing. Yeah. So
Thank you.
Yeah, enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll be in touch soon. Everybody out there, check the show notes. There's going to be all information about upcoming events, or you can connect with Zoe on Instagram, and other links and information will be all there. So be sure to check it out. Check out Zoe McGuire on Instagram. Look at the beautiful work she's doing. And yeah, let's keep going, y'all.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. All right, you take care, Zoe. Peace.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all so much for tuning into this episode of Concerning the Spiritual and Art. If you like what we're doing here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can stay in touch and in tune with all the amazing offerings that we're going to be bringing to this channel. Thanks again for all your support. Super grateful, and yeah, excited to bring more content your way. Peace, y'all.